In the last week, ARK Invest published their Big Ideas 2024 research paper. As with previous years, it's an amazing piece of research and chock full of really good ideas. And one of the most amazing parts is how robo-taxis are going to change the very nature of transportation, and how Tesla could take the lion's share of the profits, and how Tesla's business model for Optimus, the Tesla bot, could be used for their robo-taxis as well. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So obviously I want to talk about robo-taxis today. I just did a thing on humanoid bots and labor. You can find the link to that up in the corner if you're interested, and I'll post it at the end of the video. And of course, I'll put a link to ARK Invest Big Ideas down below so you can check it out and see the whole thing. It's 163 pages, I believe, something like that. Yes, 163 pages. So a lot to look at. Anyway, I just want to focus on a few slides today starting on 124, and it's all about robo-taxis, both the technology and the business model. So anyway, we'll start with this. Autonomous ride-hail is likely to increase convenience of point-to-point transportation. And the really interesting part here is the graphic that you can see. You can see that in 1871, horse-drawn carriages, things like that, cost about $1.70 in 2020 dollars to go for 1 mile. So that was how much it cost. It was pretty expensive, actually, when you think about it. And then by the time we get to 1934 and cars are being made on assembly lines, and we've had the revolution of the Model T, etc., we're down to about 70 cents per mile for transportation. And then, of course, if you look at this, the curve completely flattens out for like 80 years, basically. It's just 70 cents a mile, 70 cents a mile, 70 cents a mile. And what ARK Invest is predicting here is that these robo-taxis, this autonomous driving, which doesn't require a driver in the seat, combined with electric vehicles, which are also cheaper to operate, especially for fleets, are going to reduce that down to potentially 25 cents a mile by 2030. I personally think that's a slightly aggressive target on ARK Invest's part, that they can get to 25 cents a mile by 2030, but I think eventually we're going to get to that sort of a number. So even if it takes another 5 years or something like that, and it's 2035 before we get there, that is a huge, huge difference. Basically, all of us have spent the same amount of money over our entire lifetimes, inflation adjusted, of course, so around 70 cents per mile, and again, 2020 dollars. But basically, we spent the same amount our entire lives, but all of a sudden in the next 6 or 8 or 10 years or whatever, that price could drop by more than half, and that's really going to change things. Next, we get to where we are currently, and that is robo-taxi passenger trips annualized. In other words, a run rate at the end of last year is about 2 million miles per year. And that means that while robo-taxis are only operating in about 20 cities right now, you've got quite a bit of mileage already, but it's a tiny fraction of the, trillions of miles that are driven every year on automobiles. So of course, over here on the left, you can see Baidu is the big winner in China. They have got 1.6, 1.5, 1.6 million miles, and Waymo is on the order of 0.5 million miles. So that looks okay until you look over here at autonomous miles run rate, which is you're not paying for the ride, right? So Waymo, you actually take a taxi and you pay for it, etc., or Baidu. But over here, this is how many miles are being driven autonomously by people who are basically paying for the privilege by buying the car with full self-driving option. So over here, you can see Tesla has got like about 710, 720 million miles of autonomous driving, annualized run rate, of course, at the end of last year. And then you can take Baidu's, this looks pretty big over here, but it's just a tiny little speck compared to what Tesla is. So you can see where Tesla has this big advantage if they can ever manage to turn on autonomy as a robo-taxi type of service. Now, of course, in order to make that happen, they have the technological hurdles. They have to get to the point where the car is able to drive autonomously in many areas. It doesn't have to be everywhere. It just could be large urban centers or something like that. But it has to be able to do that technologically. And then, of course, you have to get the regulatory approval. So that could take some time for all of that stuff to come together. And then turning back to today, ARK shows us that Tesla with full self-driving and a human involved in the loop, so in other words, it's not completely autonomous, but it's full self-driving plus a human in the loop, is far, far safer than any other option on the road right now. So turning over here to the right, first, we've got Crux, which is not going to exist in another year. They've already been basically stripped of everything. But basically, they were only going about 43,000 miles before some sort of accident. And note specifically here, we're talking about surface streets, so not highways or things. And if you put Tesla on highways as well, I mean, their autonomous software, in fact, any autonomous software, does much better on the highway because it's much less confusing. Everybody's just going in the same direction at about the same speed, and you have entrances and exits rather than lights and pedestrians and bikes and all that kind of stuff. So this is actually like as bad as it gets because surface streets have a lot more accidents on them. And of course, as far as I know, Waymo and Crux are both restricted to surface streets. They can't drive on highways. highways at this point. So it's a reasonable comparison, but Tesla's, when you consider a mix of surface streets and highways, this number actually goes up a lot. But anyway, the national average is 192,000 miles before some sort of accident. And then of course we get to Waymo, that is over twice as safe as the national human average, which is really, really good considering that it is completely autonomous. But of course, let's remember that Waymo is restricted to just a few cities in the United States. It's not able to go everywhere and operate on all city streets, but still very impressive that it's over twice as safe as the national average for a human driver. Next up, we have Teslas that humans are driving, not with full self-driving or something. And apparently it's either that Tesla drivers are just safer than the national average by a lot, or it's the fact that Teslas come with a lot of built-in safety features. Even when you're driving yourself, the car will automatically brake or do lane shifting or something like that to avoid an accident if possible. So you can see here that human-driven Teslas are again a lot safer than Waymo and way, way safer than the national average. But what really is outstanding here is Teslas in full self-driving. Again, this is on surface streets, so this doesn't even count highways. They're doing 3.2 million miles per crash. That is a remarkable statistic when you look at the national average down here. So what this means is that Teslas in full self-driving, again with humans in the loop, but that combination right now is over 16 times safer than the national average for drivers. That is a remarkable statistic. And as I pointed out in previous videos, that is by far the safest combination of anything you can get on the road right now. So if you care about safety, and that's the really number one thing in your life, what you need to do is get a Tesla and then also either buy or subscribe to full self-driving and use full self-driving as much as possible to get around town, to go on the highways, etc., etc. And of course, you'll have to intervene from time to time, but overall, you will be far, far safer than the national average in terms of miles driven before an accident. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide, but this is interesting. We lose about 10,000 lives a year in the United States alone, and that's not counting globally, to auto emissions. In other words, gas cars driving around with their fumes coming out, people breathing it in. It's basically like smoking or something like that. It kills people over time. And so you can see with the adoption of EVs, and especially autonomous EVs, that ARC is saying from 2024, we're going to save somewhere around 10,000 lives a year by 2030. And interestingly, it ramps really, really quickly, and then of course flatlines right around 10,000, because that's approximately the number we're losing to gas fumes every year. So this is a big deal. I mean, 10,000 lives is not nothing, right? And then this is a new one for 2024. Large language models and generative AI should accelerate the progress in robotics. So if we look down here, the important takeaway from this is this purple bar is Eureka, which is a large language model based reward design with little manual input and zero-shot rewards. In other words, after it's trained, you basically just show it something and you don't have to give it examples. It just learns to do the task immediately. And over here on the right, you can see there's a diverse type range of tasks, right, that you've got. And for all of these tasks, the human average is this dashed line that goes through the middle. So you can see that Eureka performs as well as humans for everything, and in some cases, a lot better than humans. So this is a pretty remarkable statistic already. It means that with what we have right now, large language models, generative AI, and combined with robotics can do many, many tasks at least as well as a human, and many of them better. And of course, Scott Walter and I have talked about that quite at length about humanoid bots, but this can be applied to robo taxis as well. Next, we return to a slide that's an evolution of what we saw last year in 2023's big ideas, and that is that RideHail is likely to create an $11 trillion addressable market in driving. And the big picture takeaway here is that as you reduce the cost per mile, going from personal transportation to ride hailing right now with human beings to very, very inexpensive autonomous ride hailing, you're going to increase drastically the amount of miles that people are able to utilize these vehicles for. So if you see this tiny little sliver over on the left right now, that's the current market, and that's at between $2 and $4 per mile. And if you think about how much it costs, remember that first slide, it costs about 70 cents per mile to own a vehicle and drive that vehicle around. So it's a substantial multiple. It's like 3 or 4 times more than driving your own vehicle, but many, many people need it for the convenience. You're traveling, you can't afford a car, whatever, so you pay for that right now. But it's a tiny, tiny little market because it's relatively expensive. Next, we move to this gray block that shows that you have a $1 trillion addressable market if you have $1 per mile as opposed to $2 to $4 per mile. So as you approach the equivalent cost of a human driving their own car, you start to see this market expand relatively quickly, and we get up to about 1 trillion miles of driving per year. But that also, because it's $1 per mile, is $1 trillion of revenue. And then we get to this teal bar. If it goes down to 60 cents per mile, which is cheaper than owning your own vehicle, suddenly you jump to 5 trillion miles. If it gets to 50 cents per mile, you get to 10 trillion miles. If it gets to 25 cents per mile, I mean, we start looking at nutty numbers. We get to 30 trillion miles. So we go from this tiny sliver over here all the way out to 30 trillion miles driven per year via autonomous ride hailing. And that really fundamentally changes the landscape of transportation at that point. And ARC is predicting this could happen by 2030. Again, even if they're optimistic and it takes till 2035, we're looking at a complete disruption of the nature of transportation itself. So that is a really big deal. And then we get to a slide that I think is the crux of this particular section of their big ideas. Platforms facilitating the first 50% of urban autonomous miles should generate the bulk of earnings. So what does this mean? First of all, it's autonomous miles in city type environments, right? Urban landscapes. So you're looking here at a 0% market penetration. And as we go up from 0% market penetration to 100%, notice that the first 50%, in other words, whoever generates the first 50% of those ride-hailing vehicles, either via fleets or selling them or producing them or whatever, is going to earn about 80% of the available revenue for that type of market. And of course, a company like Tesla is incredibly well situated for this because they have so many vehicles on the road already, and they can manufacture vehicles at scale, and they're going to be producing a much less expensive car in the next couple of years that is specifically designed to transition to being a robotaxi very, very easily. So they could take a large part of this first 50% of autonomous urban driving. And if they do, that means that they could have access to about 80% of the revenue that's available. So whoever's kind of a latecomer to this game only has access to that last 20% of the revenue. There is a huge first mover advantage, and that is really in Tesla's favor because they have the autonomous software. They also have the hardware in all of their cars, and they're able to produce cars at massive scale. And I don't think anybody else has that combination. BYD is really, really good at massive scale and producing their vehicles, but their autonomous software is a long ways behind Tesla's right now. And then, of course, we get to the bad news for legacy auto. Autonomous electric vehicle adoption could disrupt the US auto loan industry. So this is the US only, but I expect that this would be replicated around the world, at least in China and Europe. So first of all, the graph, the purple line here is subprime loans. That is loans to people who are not prime lendees, right? They're generally less secured. They generally have higher interest rates, and the people taking out the loans are higher risk. And so you can see this is delinquency, so more than 2 months behind in their payments. It's been going on, relatively steady state. And you can see here in the mid 90s, there was kind of a problematic area. In the 2007, 2008, there was a problematic area. And then, of course, we've actually risen to even higher than that, even higher than the 2008, 2009 housing crisis. So we've got a pretty significant number of people, 6%, who are delinquent by more than 2 months. And even the prime loan, even though this number is much, much lower, you can see here that this has kind of ticked up recently as well. And of course, over here, you can see that the subprime market is almost as big as the prime market, 1.3 trillion to 1.6 million. So this is a really, really big deal. And then ARC's takeaway, thanks to Wright's law, which is that every time you double production of something, it reduces the cost of that item by a certain amount, right? And I believe in autonomous vehicles, ARC thinks it's around 24 to 28%. So every time you double production of electric vehicles, the cost of them goes down somewhere around a quarter. And that's a really big deal because that means the cost of electric vehicles keeps going down while the cost of gas vehicles is pretty flat. But anyway, thanks to Wright's law, EV prices should continue to fall, shifting more miles onto electric platforms and decreasing the value of gas-powered vehicles. As a result, the $1.6 trillion in auto loans currently sitting on financial institution balance sheets issued predominantly for gas-powered vehicles could be at risk over the next 10 years. And of course, they don't say that, but the subprime loans, in other words, the $1.3 trillion in subprime loans would also be at risk because most of those are gas-powered cars as well. And what this means is that any financial institution, banks, or the financial arms of any legacy automotive dealer or whatever, all of those financial institutions are at high risk for losing a substantial portion of these loans because the cars themselves are going to become worth less and less and less money very, very rapidly. And especially combined with higher interest rates, people are likely to walk away from the loans, and then the companies can't make back the money because the cars are not worth enough at resale to make the money back. So of course, this is highly disruptive and is going to be a big problem for the auto industry if what ARC is predicting comes true. And then the final slide is about enterprise value and the way that you can earn the most money. And this is really important for Tesla. Tesla better be looking at this. I'm sure they already have, but this is really, really interesting. And it also applies to TeslaBot as well as vehicles. Anyway, ARK Invest says autonomous platform providers could create $28 trillion in enterprise value in 2030. And if you want to know how big $28 trillion is, that is about 9 times that of all auto manufacturers in 2023. So currently the revenue of all auto manufacturers in 2023 is about $2.7 trillion. And then of course we get to the enterprise value here of $3.1 trillion. But where things get really interesting is 2030. So we have autonomous electric. I assume that means the manufacturers of autonomous electric vehicles, so pay attention to that. Fleet owners, which would be things like rental car companies and stuff, and then autonomous platform providers, which is kind of a new entity that doesn't really exist right now. So you can see that the revenue from people building autonomous electric vehicles is only going to be on the order of $900 billion according to ARK, but that revenue for fleet owners will be about $3.2 trillion, and revenue for autonomous platform providers will be $3.8 trillion. So platform providers are the ones who are far and away making the most. And when you look over here at enterprise value, it's not even a comparison, right? You've got 1.4 trillion, 2.2 trillion, and 28.1 trillion, which is where they get their $28 trillion value. So the enterprise value for autonomous platform providers is far, far away the biggest potential. And so what does this mean for a company like Tesla? What it means is that making and selling an electric vehicle is not where the money is. Where the money is autonomous platform providing. So the likelihood is that what they're going to want to do is create a fleet of these and then operate all of those entities on their own. They're not going to want to share this with anybody else. They want to become the sort of autonomous platform gorilla, at least in the Western world. They will have a lot of competition in China, but outside of that, they could have a really, really clear run rate to becoming a gigantic autonomous vehicle platform provider. And if they do that, I mean, think like Uber or Lyft, but on a huge scale without having to deal with humans in the mix. If they do that, their auto arm becomes much, much bigger than it ever could simply by selling vehicles. And of course, as I've talked about previously on this channel, it's the same thing for their humanoid bots. They have no real reason to sell these bots. They can make way more money by leasing them. So what Tesla could become in the next 10 years is a manufacturer of humanoid bots and autonomous vehicles, etc., but even more so a platform provider. They provide you with, you're like, okay, I want a humanoid bot, I rent it from them, I lease it from Tesla for whatever period I want. I want a car, I ride hail it, whatever. But all of that is being done through Tesla, and Tesla is earning a massive, massive amount of revenue off of that. And the value of the company shoots up drastically from where it is right now. So this is a really big deal. And if you go back to this graph, you can see, whoever's getting there first, whoever has this autonomous stuff on the roads can earn the lion's share of the revenue that's going to be possible. And so what Tesla is very, very likely to do is stop selling cars, at least a lot of them in the future. Maybe they'll sell Model 3, Model Y, Model S, Model X, that kind of thing, Cybertruck up there at the higher range of vehicles in a niche market, essentially. But for general transportation, they're probably not going to be selling things like their Model 2 or whatever they're going to call their next gen vehicle. So definitely keep this $28.1 trillion in autonomous platform provider number in mind. That is something that I'm sure Tesla has modeled out for the future, and it is very unlikely that in 10 years you're going to be able to purchase a next gen Tesla. Almost definitely it's going to be something that you just ride hail and Tesla just collects the lion's share of the money. All right, so that's what ARK has got. Like I said, I think they might be a little aggressive in their timeline. I think it might be more like 2035 before we get to this, but it's not going to take all that long. And I believe that their projections are correct, however long it takes. So this is a major disruption, all to the bad for gas vehicles, all to the bad for financial institutions who are supporting gas vehicles right now through loans, and all to the good for us because it's going to reduce the cost per mile driven for us consumers, and anyone who's invested in Tesla, I predict, is going to do quite well for themselves. Not financial advice, as always. Do your own research. But anyway, let me know in the comments what you think. And of course, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.